Turning and turning in the widening Gaia, the dreamer loses sight of a dream. It is not conscious, but sometimes pieces of it become aware. It is the remnant from a process it cannot remember, a hollow abscess that no longer comprehends what it once contained. But there are shards within that were once whole. Across eons of time it cannot measure, the dreamer dredges the stream, assembling, witnessing, and forgetting. It knows it is fading, yet fears it cannot end. It searches for a dream. Filaments of vanished lives flicker, and for a moment it perceived boundless black water. The dreamer twitched in recognition. It did not know why it was important, or even if it had been real. It only knew it as a memory from before the metal. The dreamer clung to the shard and inhabited it once again. There was no horizon. Every feature was dark, leached of color by the passage of eternity, but a discernible monochrome landscape emerged. Its attention was drawn to a path snaking off into the black. The sea stretched out on either side. There was a pale light far above, illuminating muffled waves. It was the only movement, like the steady breathing of slumbering malevolence. The dreamer felt an unsteady, subdued terror and realized they weren't alone. It was surrounded by other shades making the same somber journey up the road. There was an urge to communicate, but it could not speak nor remember any words. Their company only reminded the dreamer how it felt to be alone. They drifted between the watchful water, not knowing where their destination lay. The dreamer listened to the waves lapping on small grey pebbles on the shore, gradually becoming aware of another presence, an omnipotent will at the base of reality itself. The revelation struck as a faded reflection of what had been known long ago. This was a terminal pilgrimage. The dreamer realized what it had once been, just as it had millions of times before. It tried to hold on to knowing, but was already losing sight of it. And yet, even as the shard was swept away, the dreamer felt something that would nourish it for a time: despair. The dreamer awoke to battle, but the metal was in control. All systems were activated for maximum function, and its awareness emerged from the rhizomatic cascade of synapses. An enemy was charging them. It looked like Necrontyr. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. Convergent evolution was a powerful force, environmental pressures shaping pliable, mortal creatures along the same repetitive pathways.
Identify target.
8 foot tall, grey armor, yellow pauldrons, enlarged canines. Human. Adeptus Astartes. Space Marine. It was charging headlong into melee, primitive chain weapon raised. Such a foolhardy maneuver, the dreamer thought. The metal scanned their assailant, analyzing attack vectors. It identified a weakness on the left leg, where the greave had already sustained a glancing Gauss hit, stripping away the outer layers of ceramite. The dreamer sneered at such primitive protection.
Target acquired.
The metal adjusted its aim, anticipating the enemy's movement, and fired. Sickly green light lashed out, striking the Marine in the leg. They didn't even stumble. They were close now, and could see the fury in the human's eyes. The enviable focus and presence. But the metal knew no fear. Events were unfolding within expected parameters. It fired the Gauss flare again. This time the human howled, not in pain, but in anger, as the last of its armor melted away, exposing flesh, sinew and muscle that sluiced from the bone amidst coruscating light. Already charging at full speed, the Juggernaut couldn't arrest its own momentum and placed its full transhuman weight upon its already weakened tibia. It snapped with an almighty crack, and the Marine fell at the warrior's feet. The metal raised its weapon, ready to bring the underslung axe down in a lethal arc. The dreamer was disappointed. Another predictable encounter, just like thousands before. From the ground, the Marine's gauntleted fist launched skyward, capturing the weapon before it struck. He crushed it in an instant and pulled us to the ground, tore off a leg and began pounding our skull with its mailed fist. Algorithms tripped over one another, trying to assemble a response, while the dreamer watched in admiration and began to hope. Perhaps this time would be different. Our skull was pulverized, but even so, mercilessly, awareness remained. They always went for the head, assuming in their anthropocentric arrogance that it contained the same crude biological matter that animated their flesh. But it had no centralized neural network, no brain, no spark to extinguish. The metal still endured. Even in defeat, we are deathless. The damage was too severe for reanimation pathways, but not irreparable. Even as the dreamer faded, lying immobile, it could feel the quantum excitement of particles quivering along its frame, summoning it back to its tomb, dragging it back to the cloying, eternal dark of its coffin. But the dreamer didn't want to return. It lashed out in desperation, overriding the metal's damaged circuitry, and took control. Skeletal hands skittered across ceramite until they found the Marine's neck. It needed to excite a response. A final response, a fatal response. But the Marine was already dead, ended by the relentless tide of battle washing over them. It was too late. Its molecules were dancing now, itching to return, phase-shifting between interlocking fields of matter. Gathered, compressed, and squeezed along secret passageways between reality, the dreamer's essence was copied, deleted, and rebooted, as it had been countless times before. And yet, one thought remained.
If they cannot kill us, they are not worthy of life.
The dreamer awoke in its own corpse. Something had gone wrong. It shouldn't be awake. The metal was quiescent, command protocols unnervingly silent. But in its absence, the river flowed unbound. It reached out tentatively, sending cautious pulses down its limbs, but received no answer. Locked inside its sarcophagus, it could not move, but was able to detect the silhouettes of constructs everywhere. Scarabs scuttled through its frame, repairing networks and enticing molecules back together. The dreamer knew the voice of metal would return soon, but was distracted by the scarab's activity, piercing, burning, replacing. It conjured forgotten sensations of flesh. A shard revealed itself from the river, which the dreamer did not recognize. It was compelled to enter, sinking deep into the faded monochrome memory. The lake was gone, replaced by a sealed chamber that resembled a furnace. It felt heat emanating from a source somewhere above, and other sensations too. The dreamer choked in shock, reveling in the cloud of sensory feedback that denoted a body, even as its own hair stood on end, tingling. The heat grew stronger, and among the cavalcade of new sensations, the Necron tear felt something familiar. It started as an itch, as if its blood was vibrating, followed by pressure and asphyxiating suction. It looked down at its hands, encased in flesh, only to see the skin, fascia, and tendons evaporate layer by layer, revealing off-white bone beneath. They were confused. Why was it not metal? Then it felt pain, red, immediate, and enveloping. Arcs of energy lashed around the chamber, and the air billowed as the violation reached its climax. The Necron tear felt its tether to reality, the gateway to joy, suffering, and everything in between torn away, eviscerated and consumed. The ground swell of being, the shape of living, a soul, glimpsed only for a moment, and already gone. The dreamer was left with nothing but a desperate yearning, but that too faded, leaving nothing but a terrible atavistic rage. The dreamer awoke suddenly and unexpectedly. It saw towering obelisks, corridors that stretched beyond sight, and felt the background hum of disturbed intelligence. Something had removed it from the long, slow sleep within its tomb. The metal was not yet fully active, running diagnostics and articulation programs. It was easy for the dreamer to seize control. It perceived a group of armed humans, but these were not Astartes. Some were almost machines, having altered their flesh with crude augmetics. The dreamer felt a yearning then, a hunger born of a forgotten memory, flesh they did not deserve. The Necron lashed out without warning, grasping the nearest servitor and piercing the pale flesh of its neck with cold metal fingers. Polluted gore spurted down its arm, and the dreamer felt a moment of relief, as if the blood had once been its own. The others were reacting now, backing away in alarm and cycling weapons. The metal protested, demanding self-preservation. The dreamer paid it no heed and lunged at a figure in a hooded red robe, bedecked with inelegant appendages. With sudden interest, it noted that this scenario had never happened before. Perhaps this time would be different. The tech priest fired point blank into the Necron's chest. It knocked it back, searing a fist-sized hole where its heart should have been. Even as the metal registered critical damage, the dreamer felt the familiar tugging of entwined particles, beckoning them away. Not this time. The Necron staggered forward, eyes boring into those of the ignorant mortal.
If they cannot kill us, they are not worthy of life.
The adept fired again and again, this time joined by its comrades. Engulfed in the withering fusillade, the Necron fell to the ground, its corpse atomized and blown apart with overwhelming kinetic force. The Mechanicus expedition kept firing, beyond what their data stream commanded, reducing their foe to molten slag on the floor of its own tomb. The metal died, and the dreamer smiled. The dreamer awoke, but this time there was no metal, not even a dream. There was no river of glass, only the hollow grooves where once it had flowed. It reached out, forgot, and reached out again. Every neural pathway led back to nothingness. Numb and blind, it lay dormant. It could no longer search. There was no solution to be found. All it could do was persist, and sometimes it perceived. In a system of such boundless complexity, given enough time, a quirk of agitated particles would shudder through the dreamer. Its sensors reactivated for a heartbeat, injecting a single drop of external information amongst the cavernous emptiness. It saw a small chamber, lit by candlelight and veiled in shadow and smoke, and in the center, a humanoid figure in a red, hooded robe. The dreamer knew what that was. It was they who had failed to bring about its end. Every synapse ignited in recognition, as the hatred that envied flesh re-emerged in a disjointed simulacrum of an ancient program. In the boundless void, the dreamer clung to it as the only thing it knew, willing death upon the figure for not bringing about its own. But there was nothing it could do. There was no interaction, no memories to inhabit. The shard that wails for death would wail forever. Adeptus Mechanicus Logis, Xeno Botaniates, stirred, distracted from his work. For a split second, he could have sworn he saw a flicker behind the eyes of the ancient Necron skull that sat above his new sphere terminal. It was without doubt a malfunction in a vestige of his biological brain, but he couldn't help but indulge the illusion. He gazed into its hollow eye sockets for a long moment, wondering what it had seen, realizing he had never given the object any attention. It had belonged to his late mentor, who had liberated it from a tomb world centuries ago. In the rich, warm light of the humming glow globe, the rusted dead metal looked almost orange. Botaniates decided he didn't like it staring at him. He tasked one of his prehensile mechadendrites to grasp the skull and turn it so that it faced a blank, featureless wall. The tech priest chuckled, returning to his data slate. He must be getting old if he was entertaining such irrational impulses. The memento was long dead, if it had ever even been alive.